Welcome to CNRL Author Talks, where authors come to talk about their latest books with librarians from the Central Northern Regional Library in New South Wales, Australia. This week, our Reader's Advisory librarian Ita Hansens talks with best-selling Australian author Tanya Heaslip to discuss her memoir, An Alice Girl.
Tanya, it's so funny to see you because I feel like I know you because I've read Alice to Prague, which I loved, and I read Girl, which I finished yesterday. So I'm part of the family, but you don't know me.
That is, I always feel that with memoir. I feel as though I know the writer so intimately, and then I think, but she doesn't know me.
That's it.
Yeah. But okay, I'm so excited you've read both. That's wonderful. Thank you.
Yes. I'm so glad we are doing this talk because it was always on my to-read list and I never got around to do it. But now I had to, and it was amazing. I loved it.
Yeah.
Lunch break, I was reading Alice to Prague, and you had me laughing out loud. And then the next chapter, I was in tears, and I go, "Oh, I'm glad I'm home in my lunch break." So yeah, I've been talking to everybody about it, so they've been heavily reserved at the library now.
That's wonderful, absolutely wonderful. Thank you, Ita. That's just music to my ears.
Oh, good.
Yeah, it's just the greatest joy when you slave over writing something and then somebody reads it and then they like it and then they tell other people. You can't ask for anything more wonderful.
Yes, I've been telling all my colleagues in the lunchroom and any, of our patrons that come in, you have to read this.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much.
No worries. It was my pleasure. It was really good. But your books came in really late because of Corona now. So it took, so we only got it on, I think, Tuesday. So I would have liked to take more time to really enjoy it, but I raced through it a bit. So I might just have to read it again. That's okay.
Yeah. But at least you've got it. That's the main thing. That's wonderful to know.
No worries. Well, I might just do the hello. So welcome, everyone. My name's Ita. I'm from Tamworth Library, and I would like to welcome you all to our virtual question and answer session with author Tanya Heaslip. But before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge the Kamilaroi people who are the traditional custodians of the land and pay my respects to the elders, both past and present. Now, Tanya, who's joining us today, is a best-selling author of Alice to Prague. She grew up on a cattle station in Outback, Australia. She studied and practiced law and taught English for 2 years in the Czech Republic in the 90s. Her first memoir is all about her time there. And like I said, I don't know if you're already here, but I love that one. Tanya now lives with her husband in the Northern Territory, and we will discuss her latest book, An Alice Girl, today. So if you have any questions, please write them in the chat box and I will read them to Tanya at the end of the session. So everybody just please say hello to and welcome to Tanya. Yay! So Tanya, like I said, it's such a pleasure to talk to you in real life, not just through the book, because I feel like you're a friend now. So Tanya's going to read a little bit of a book so we get a taste of Tanya's book. So over to Tanya.
Thank you, Ita, so much. Thank you to your library and to all the Tamworth people who have signed in. I have to tell you, growing up here in Outback, Australia, as a child, singing with a guitar around a campfire, we dreamed of going to the Tamworth Country Music Festival. Like, that was just, for us, the highlight. And I never got there. I still haven't got there, but it still remains on my list. One of those things that I'd so love to do. And now I'm actually talking to the library, which is so exciting. Are you actually based right in Tamworth?
Yes, we are.
Oh, I can't wait to tell my brother and sister. They'll be so excited because, like me, they only, we just always wanted to go to the Tamworth Music Country Festival because, that's Slim Dusty would be there, and that's where all our heroes sang.
Oh, so you have to come.
It's very exciting for me. And I'd like to thank you all for coming out on Saturday to join us. And so to kick off, I thought I might read a short extract from chapter 1 in my book, which Ita's kindly been telling you about, An Alice Girl. You might be able to see behind me, there's another book called Alice to Prague, which was the other book that Ita mentioned, and I published that last year. And this is the prequel. So Alice to Prague, as Ita said, is set in the 90s when I went to Prague just after the Berlin Wall fell. And this is set in the 60s and 70s. So it's a prequel to that. It's all about growing up here in Alice and really what led me ultimately to have that desire to travel overseas and go to the Czech Republic. But to start with, all I knew was isolated, raw, red, central, outback Australia. So chapter 1 is hopefully fittingly titled Where It All Began. We loved it. My brother and sister and I loved every part of our new world. As far as our little eyes could see were miles upon miles of emptiness. Huge blue skies and bare earth. We heard pink cockatoos squawk in the gum trees and crickets click and clack at night. But it was also a place of silence. There was not a person or town to be seen. We could shout into the hills and hear our voices echo back to us. We could lie on our backs at night and imagine the sky of stars swallowing us whole. We knew we could die out here under the savage summer sun, and our bones would turn white and dissolve in the dry winds, just like the bones of the kangaroos and dingoes. Nobody would ever know we'd been there. We thought that was kind of exciting. Our property was settled in the 1870s by two men who walked all the way from Adelaide to get there. It took them a whole year. I often thought how tired they must have been by the time they arrived, but how happy to discover this beautiful land. Each sunrise and sunset, the high mountains filled with the colours of the sky, colours so soft and beautiful after the harshness of the day that it always made my heart sing. Shades of red would turn to apricot, then soft pink, layers of purple, and finally black as the hills dissolved into the night. Every morning the hills and skies would light up again, changing colour in reverse. It was like magic, and I would try to draw it with coloured pencils, but could never capture its true beauty. Nature had its own special paint set. Colour came in other surprising ways too. Even in drought years, mulga trees gave us flowers that shone gold in the sunshine and thick spinifex that looked like straw, making the plains dance with light. It was a land rich with stories of the past. There was the Aboriginal Dreamtime and the sea that had once covered everything here. Those powerful forces had pushed the earth up into the sky, creating huge rocky ranges that ran from east to west, known to locals as the MacDonald Ranges, but to the local Aranda people as Caterpillar Dreaming.
Yay!
Thank you.
It's so nice to hear it in your voice and not in my voice. So we have an author talk a little bit different now. Normally you would come to the library, promote your book and, bring your guitar or whatever. And so now it's a little bit different. So what do you feel as an author during COVID-19? How have you coped with promoting your book, not being able to travel and having to do it online? How's it for you?
That is such an interesting question because nobody could have foreseen COVID and nobody in the book industry could have imagined how it would affect us. So I had plans that had taken about half a year to put together. Of the next 3 months, I was going to be travelling and meeting people and promoting my book. And virtually over that weekend, which I think was Friday the 15th, 16th and 17th of, was it February or March? I've lost track. Everything overnight changed.
Yep.
And so within a day, less than a day, my next 3 months were dissolved before my eyes. So luckily, I've got a very innovative husband who's very good with IT. And when I dried my tears, he said, okay, we'll think of other ways to try and get your book out there. And so we created little videos filmed of me out on our cattle station, me in my old schoolroom, me in the saddle shed, me down in the horse yards and near the old first homestead. And they were about 25 to 30 seconds each. And so we put them up on my author page starting early May. I think it was about early May, because the book came out on the 19th. And if you have time and are interested, on my Tanya Heaslip author Facebook page,
Oh, cool.
you can see these. Yeah, you can see all these videos. In the end, we did about 8, I think. And then we did a virtual launch here at the local bookshop, and a fabulous local celebrity who's also spent a lot of time at Tamworth, and you may know, is Ted Egan. He's from Central Australia, and he plays a beer carton, and he's written all these amazing, fantastic songs about characters of the territory, and I understand he's performed at Tamworth over the years. So he joined us for our virtual launch in the bookshop, and we all had suitable distancing, but we had a glass of champagne. That was fantastic.
Oh,
unfortunately, because we'd never done a Facebook Live before, there was an echo, and partly that might have been the bandwidth. Nobody knows, because we'd never done it. Yep. But anyhow, it went for about 15 minutes, and a lot of people watched it, which was wonderful. In fact, we had over 1,000 people.
Oh, wow.
Who have watched it, which, even though there's an echo, that's a real joy. And then after that, very luckily, some of the restrictions here started easing, and the territory's borders are locked. But I was able to go out, and we'd put a table in front of the local bookshop, and people would come, and so I've signed books. And now this joy of joys, Zoom, is enabling me now to go to libraries and to other places that I'd planned. But also, and this is a real joy and an unexpected joy, I'm here, with the Tamworth Library. I know. So thanks to Zoom. So it's been a really interesting, quite stressful to start with, couple of months, as we had to change our strategy overnight. But I've been very lucky and helped by so many people. And Zoom, wow, what a difference Zoom makes.
I know. Yeah, I had to work out how to work it all, but I use it for my book club as well, so that's good.
Yes.
So you grew up on an isolated farm where you had to make up your own games. You only playmates were your brother and your sister. So did that actually prepare you for this isolation in COVID?
Probably very much. I'm so used to having grown up and worked in and studied in isolation that I think those formative years, well, in fact, it prepared me for more than COVID, because off and on for the last 20 years, I've run my own legal practice. And from time to time, I've gone back into offices, but it's enabled me to work from home, because I just sort of had ingrained in me from School of the Air and Correspondence School how to work completely on your own without the need for supervision or discipline. I think it was just ingrained. And isolation to me is really normal. And even though I haven't always lived in Alice, it's probably like everything for everyone in childhood. That's your starting point. So it's probably your most natural point. So even though the time has been economically terrible for so many people here in the territory, and Alice in particular, because our whole economy here is underpinned by tourism, probably a bit like Tamworth, that's been really hard. But from my personal perspective, I've been able to manage it as though it was any other day, which I feel really lucky.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
So, and I've got this great studio, which is, you can see behind me, it's a bit chaotic, and I've got, it doesn't look like a lawyer's studio or a lawyer's office, but it's a great creative place to work in.
Yeah, definitely. So I read your Alice to Prague first, because it was your first book. And then when I read An Alice Girl, I go, oh, she's going back in time. So what did you do that? Why did you do Alice to Prague first and then start at the start again?
That is also a really good question. I came back from Prague, and I was so enamoured with the people I'd met, the culture I'd experienced, the music I'd listened to, the art I'd seen, the architecture, just the beauty of this place that was still quite preserved in time, because even though it had been economically destroyed by the communists, it was completely free from the West's influence. So when I came back, and of course there was no such thing as computer. Well, there were computers, but there wasn't social media like there is today. And I didn't know anyone who knew anything about Prague or the Czech people. And I thought, I really want to write their story. I feel very compelled to write their story. And I was working full time, so it took me a long time, but bit by bit, I just started pulling the story together. And at the end, when I finally was able to get it published, luckily, not before I'd experienced about 30 rejections and rewritten it.
Well done.
Yeah. It was a 15-year process to publication.
Wow.
But when I got there, this colleague of mine said, you know, you've wanted to write this Prague book. It's been a burning passion for you. But do you realise that Central Australia, for most people, is as exotic as Central Europe? And that really got me thinking. And as a result, Alan and Unwin wonderfully gave me a 2-book contract. So it meant Alice of Prague came out, and then I went back in time. And if this book sells well, and hopefully it will, I'll be able to do a 3rd book, sort of continuing on with some more stories
cool.
of the outback.
Yeah, that'd be cool. So I didn't grow up in Australia. I'm Dutch. And I was just fascinated by your early schooling, like the correspondence school, the School of the Air. It just sounded amazing. Can you just tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, it was, of course, totally normal to me. I didn't really know there was any other way of doing school. But in retrospect, of course, it was very different. So the schooling was in 2 parts. The first part was the written part, correspondence school, and maybe some of your listeners here will be familiar with the correspondence school across Australia. Mine came out of Adelaide, and we did written lessons from 7:30 in the morning to 1 o'clock in the afternoon each day, Monday to Friday, and we had a governess who supervised us. They were written lessons that followed a formula for each day and each part of the day. Then we would send them by mail to Adelaide to be marked by a teacher we'd never seen, never met, and it would take maybe a month or more for them to come back. And we'd have to try and remember what we'd sent down, but we so eagerly awaited for those gold stars, hopefully, and not too many red crossings out. But that was the cycle. They were called 14-day sets that we worked on. But then each day in the middle of 7:30 to 1, School of the Air kicked in. That was run out of Alice Springs, again, with a teacher that we couldn't see and students we couldn't see, but we could hear them. And that was very exciting. So, for example, each grade had half an hour, and say I was in grade 3, I might come on at 10 o'clock, and my teacher was Mrs. Hodder, and she'd say, BJD, this is Mrs. Hodder calling. Can you read me out there at Sierra Victor Uniform, Tanya? Over. And I'd say, oh, good morning, Mrs. Hodder. Yes, this is Tanya from Sierra Victor Uniform. I can read you loud and clear. Over. And we'd go through this process, and she'd basically do the roll call of every student, and we'd have half an hour to read books and sometimes sing songs and to do the kinds of lessons that were halfway between being written, because you couldn't see what you were looking at, but a bit less than being in a classroom. So we did do a lot of songs, and Mrs. Hodder had a piano in the studio, so she'd belt out God Save the Queen on it every Monday morning, and all the kids would stand up around the bush, and we'd all be on our microphones belting out through the static, God Save Our Gracious Queen, and she played away at the studio. It was just marvellous. And so through that we had the chance to sing, and we also had the chance to read aloud. So for me, that School of the Air was very much like theatre. It introduced me to a love of that connection of voice, and how you can connect with other people in different ways. It's not just face to face. So even though it was very normal for us and different then, the interesting thing is we've come sort of full circle, and during times of COVID, School of the Air has suddenly become very much a hot topic, and the Alice Springs School of the Air has fielded calls from all around the world. I think they've had some from Germany, from Switzerland, from Africa, even the States, and definitely England.
Wow.
And Canada, asking for advice about long distance remote learning. So suddenly our little School of the Air that was set up for the outback, and then of course has been replicated across Australia, has become a very important learning tool. And of course, School of the Air is now very different because now they do use computers and they can see one another.
Like
and of course, exactly. Yeah. And when I did it, it was already an improvement from when it began in 1951, where the kids had to use a pedal radio. They had to pedal like an old Singer sewing machine and pedal to get the transmission. If they stopped pedaling, transmission stopped. By the time I got there, it was a little two-wave radio with a little microphone that we spoke on. So it was a wonderful way to do education.
Oh, I'm so glad I read it, because for me, like you said before, it's as exotic to me as Prague was to you.
Yes.
I especially loved when you visited the School of the Air, the headquarters, and you were shown the library. And as a librarian, I love that part, and I'll quote you here. You said, "I stood gazing at the spines of the stories, tentatively opening the covers, smelling the beautiful pages, and I knew in the moment that words would always have the power to transport me to other worlds." And your books has certainly had that effect on me, because I felt both like I was in Prague and I felt like I was in the outback. So do you feel that way about words?
Do I what, sorry?
Do you still feel like that about words, that they transport you to...
You just brought tears to my eyes reading it aloud, even though I wrote it. Yes, the power of words. My most favourite thing in the whole wide world is to read, and I think being a librarian and working with books all day long is one of the, it's almost a sacred role, because are the source of all knowledge and understanding and learning. And if I'd not had those books as a child in the outback, I would have learned very little about the outside world, because I learned a bit through correspondence lessons and of course School of the Air. Mrs. Hodder read us stories, but to have your own book to read that can transport you. And interestingly, the School of the Air had an enormous stack of Enid Blyton books, and I don't know who delivered them up, but here I was in the outback devouring this diet of the Magic Faraway Tree and the Secret Seven and the Famous Five, and just transported to these other lands in the same way. And it really, I was a curious, bookish child anyway, but I couldn't read enough, and it taught me about other places. And from that early age, I knew I wanted to travel and see them. It was this burning desire to see with my own eyes places that had soft green meadows filled with golden daffodils and blue lakes and snowy mountains and green woods and oak trees. All these things were incomprehensible to me, but I imagined them. They were so real in my imagination. It was all thanks, of course, to the power of those words.
Yes, definitely. I just see Susan coming in. Hello, Susan. So normally when we are talking to authors of fiction books, we ask where did they get the ideas of the characters, that sort of stuff. But obviously your characters are real characters. And I really loved Ray, the Irish stockman. I thought he was just... And your friend Janie, she was just so amazing. So I just wondered, because you would have had so many characters in your life, how do you decide who to put in and who to leave out?
Yeah, that was really quite difficult. There were so many characters I could have put in. I think what I did in writing the story, because I didn't have a lot of time to do it, was I sat with my brother and sister and other family members, and I asked them, I told them of my memories and I asked them to pull their memories. And so through that, I found lots of stories about particular areas. And in the end, it was the stories where I had the richest detail that ended up becoming the ones that I wrote about. But yes, there were so many more I could have written about. And the characters I did write about, I could have written more about them as well.
Yeah, I can just imagine. So your brother Brett, he's one of my favorite characters because he's just so cheeky. I was laughing when you were telling about his naked bike escapades to just avoid going in the bath. And he seems so sweet when he calls Benny when he comes as a baby, and he calls him darling. I thought, oh, that's...
Yeah.
So how do your siblings feel about you writing this book about them? Like, do they still love you?
Well, I had to do a bit of groveling to start with. I said, look, I've got the world's best opportunity. Alan and Unwin are going to publish Alistair Prague. But the deal is I have to deliver a story about growing up here to be published 12 months to the date of Alistair Prague. And I really need your support and help. So we'll take one for the team. And my dear family, the majority of them are introverts, and they were initially horrified, but they all came to the party. And I think what they realised was, and I think this is very important for me, we were crystallising a time in history and a place and a lifestyle that doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
And that, in a way, we were preserving that for future generations, but also for their children. And also, in a way, I was telling the story of all the other bush kids here who are still here and have grown up and still on the land. And nobody's told their story before like this.
Yeah.
There are other stories of Central Australia, and Kim Mahood, I don't know if you've read Kim, just the most beautiful writer. She's written about Central Australia as a child and an adult, but not in a straight memoir style as I have.
Okay.
So it was a combination of all those factors.
Yeah.
And also I gave them every single draft, and they had 100% right of veto and 100% right to require me to change or to pull out. So I was in the end gratified that what I put in, even if they were a little bit unsure about it going out into the world, that they'd ticked off on it. And I'm hoping that actually their children find it a great source of stories about their parents' life, and that time no longer exists here in Central Australia, because the land is still the same, but the life is very different. We have better roads and better vehicles and better communication, and back then it was a different world.
Yeah, and we're so privileged to, that you shared that with us. I just want to remind all the people that have joined us, if you have any questions to Tanya, please put them in the chat and I will ask them for you. So reading both your books, Tanya, I could feel the love you feel for your family and for the outback, and even through your book as well. But in your book, you say, when you're learning to write, you say, and I quote Tanya here, life seemed hard enough without deliberately adding pain to it. So would you say it's a hard life but a great life?
Yes, it's a hard life but a great life. I think, the life on the land is hard. Life on the land in the 60s and 70s in outback Central Australia was unbelievably hard, and children were the core workforce, because stockmen came and went, but most of them back then were young male drifters. They'd come and they'd go, but your children were there. So, and Dad was a hard taskmaster. He'd come out of the Irish potato famine, with that story coming down through the generations, and he wanted us to learn to work hard so that we could survive in this world, but also so we could be his efficient, stable workforce. And I found everything about the life incredibly wonderful, but also really, really hard. And I did find writing very difficult, because I was always being chucked off and breaking bones. So pain seemed to be a big part of our life.
Yeah, definitely. So many of the issues that you write in the book, the 60s and 70s, like drought, floods, fires, family dynamics, rising debts, it still seems that's the same now. And sometimes I think, why would you want to be a farmer? What are your thoughts on that?
I think that is such a good question. I think there are so many farmers out there and people on the land who have given up and walked away because it's just too soul destroying to see your land dying and your stock dying. And I think there's a whole generation of farmers and cattle people who will be forever marked and marred by this really terrible time. But I think the reason people take it up in the first place, or actually I'm not sure, there are lots of different reasons. I think the reason people stay is this love of the land, because the land gets into your blood, into your DNA, and it becomes part of you. And so even though I've lived all over Australia and all over the world, and I've worked in so many different places and lived in different places, that the call of the land is what draws me back all the time, and it's the place I feel strongest and most centered and stable in myself. And I'm not even working the land now. So, you know, if that's how I feel, then the people actually working the land have it, you know, 10 times to that degree. And I think I also think it's really interesting that people who grow up by the sea or by the river or by mountains have a similar affinity to those parts of nature, and it's the place they're often drawn back to and feel most at home. Nature is a mysterious and magical thing, for want of a better word, and it works its way into your soul, I think, particularly if you love it when you grow up. And so I think that's why people stay even when they're almost beyond the point of economic ruin.
Yeah, definitely. And it was quite hard in that time, the 60s and 70s, for the wives. And you actually put, who would want to be a bushwife? Not me, in your book.
Yeah.
But now you live in the Northern Territory and you don't work the land, but you're still on property, aren't you?
No, I'm not, but I'm close to it. I actually live in Alice Springs now. My husband and I came back here 3.5 years ago because my father was dying, and I thought I can always be a lawyer and I can always live and work elsewhere, and I'd always come back. I'd come back 2 to 3 times each year, but these are years I think that will be precious, that I don't want to miss. I want to spend that time with Dad, so that brought us back. But because our place is just north of Alice, you know, I was able to, and I'm still able to have that kind of contact. So and I sometimes think, I don't know how I stayed away for so long.
Yes, I can imagine that. So I still have a million questions, and I could talk to you for hours, but we'll just go through. There's a few questions from the audience there, so just in case we get cut off by Zoom, I'll ask them to you now, if that's okay.
Sure.
I would like to know why Prague as a first European city. Can I just quickly answer what it wasn't actually her first city. She had a holiday in Europe first in the 80s, wasn't it? And then in the 90s she went to Prague. But I'll give it over to Tanya now to tell you why she chose Prague to go.
Yes, you've summed it up perfectly. It was 89 I saw the Berlin Wall fall, and it changed my life. And I thought, I want to see what's on the other side of that wall. I want to understand what that Cold War world was like, especially fresh after the Berlin Wall fell, before, you know, the Western influence had come in too much. And there was a whole series of circumstances that led me there. And so I took time off law and I went to teach English, and ended up in Prague and fell in love. And to know more, may I recommend you read Alice to Prague, where it's all set out. And I think Ita has some copies in the library, or will have soon. And
you should really read it, because I loved it. So there was Rhonda. Rhonda had another question. Where did you attend secondary school?
In Adelaide. A lot of people, a lot of bush people in Central Australia and the Territory went south. Some went east, but most went south to Adelaide for secondary school. There weren't secondary school equivalents here, so the government paid a subsidy to bush people to send their children south. So it was 1,000 miles south, and I would not recommend boarding school for anyone, to be quite honest. That might be book 3.
Yeah, I was waiting for that, because in both the books you allude to it that you really didn't like it, and then this book, the Alice one, stops when you actually have to go. And I go, but I want to know.
Well, that actually was just by sheer chance, because this book, An Alice Girl, was going to be right up until I finished boarding school. But by the time I got to age 12, I had so many stories. I went to my publisher and said, I don't know what to do. And she looked at it and she said, I think boarding school is actually a whole different story in itself.
Yeah.
So we decided this would be 0 to 12 years of age. And then I hope my publisher still agrees that we'll look at boarding school next time round, because that is a story in itself.
Yeah, I can imagine. So Lynn asks, was becoming an author always a passion for you?
Oh, yes, Lynn, it was. From growing up in the outback, where I had no cap on my imagination at all, and all these wonderful Enid Blyton books to lose myself in, I just wanted to write. And I think people who want to write are probably like that from the word go, that they just have this desire to write. And so I wrote and wrote, and I'd write all these strange stories of bush kids having adventures in gorgeous English meadows, and English children cycling their bikes through the bush chasing cattle. You know, this weird juxtaposition of stories and people, and it seemed completely normal to me to combine all these different worlds in my head. And so I think from then I always knew that I was going to write. But it was interesting that I started the journey in memoir rather than, but maybe all those stories of a child will come out later in fiction.
That was actually one of my questions, that both your books are memoirs. So we already know you might have another one about your secondary school, the boarding school, but reading both your books, I think your imagination is wonderful. So I think you could take on fiction. So are you already working on the next book? Can you?
Look, I had planned to, but with the whole COVID thing taking over our lives, I'd barely, and the very tight time frame to write. I published Alice to Prague in May last year, and then we went on a big tour. Then I started this in July, and I had 3 months to write this.
Wow.
That was horrible. So that was day and night, and then another 3 months with editing and photographs and pulling it all together. And then COVID hit, and then we had to start planning a whole new way of marketing this. So all the plans for my next lot of writing have gone on hold, but I'm desperately hoping to start soon. And thank you for that vote of confidence for fiction.
Oh, God, you can do it for sure. So Lynn has a question that actually was on my list as well. What books do you like to read for your own enjoyment?
Well, I think I'm fairly predictable, given what I write and what you've learned so far. I've got two favourite genres. The first is memoir and bibliography. I love reading stories about other people and their lives. I particularly love reading about women and what they've done in their lives, and overcoming obstacles and doing brave things. I really am inspired. So I read those books to learn and for inspiration. And the other, this is all thanks to Enid Blyton, I'm convinced. I just love thrillers because Enid Blyton, all her stories, you look at Secret Seven, Famous Five, they were the setup for thrillers. So each chapter is really short. It ends on a cliffhanger. The tension mounts and mounts, and then hopefully the goodies beat the baddies at the end. And so, you know, from that moment on, I just loved reading adventure books and thrillers, and I find that complete escapism.
Yes, for sure. So what are you currently reading? Are you reading something?
Yes, I have found it hard to fit in reading at the moment, but I've just read two really beautiful books, Return to Dust, or in fact 3 books. Return to Dust, which is a local territory author, Danny Powell, which is fabulous, and 2 broader books, Where the Crawdads
I love that one. Yes.
My
favorites.
Yes, I go down on bended knees for that. And the other one that I just finished and love, which is sort of that classic thriller, is The Scholar by
Delpha Ruin.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, the Irish writer who's a lawyer and now lives in Perth. And the first one was The Ruin.
The Ruin,
yeah. So the other 3 are so a bit of an eclectic mix. And Danny's, which is set here in the territory, it is fiction, but it's based on memoir on her life. So there you go. I've got a mix of both styles.
That's so fantastic. So Rhonda is asking, should I read Alice to Prague first? Well, I actually did, because that was the first one that came out and the other one wasn't out yet. And I think that works fine, because in Alice to Prague, you sometimes talk about the past, but in an Alice Girl, you get the whole, childhood. I quite liked it to first, get to know the adult Tanya and then go back to the child. But what do you say, Tanya? What should she read first?
Well, that's a really good question. Gee, there's some good questions, because I don't know. I don't know. I think if you're Alice to Prague is from an adult's perspective, and it weaves in the background of growing up in the bush. And so if you're really interested in a little bit of travel and history and a love story, that's probably a very good place to start. To quote Maria from The Sound of Music. But an Alice Girl it's sort of a classic memoir of growing up in the bush. So if you're more interested in starting out on the journey and here in the outback, then try that. But I do think they're interchangeable. And when I worked this out with my publisher, initially we debated, should I put out an Alice Girl first about growing up here? And she, in the end, she was very relaxed. She said, no, it'll actually work really well doing the adult story and then having a prequel.
Yep.
So I think the answer is whatever takes your fancy. I'd just be so thrilled if you read either, and if you read both, I'd be ecstatic.
So Rhonda says she grew up isolated with Enid Blyton, so she will start with an Alice Girl. They're both fabulous, so you can't go wrong, really. Let's see.
That's wonderful, Rhonda.
Thank you, Tanya. Let's see if I've done all the questions now. Should I read? So Rhonda asked, which is your favorite Australian author? Now, I read that your cousin is a rural romance author as well. Is it?
Oh, yes, Fleur MacDonald.
Yes.
She's my first cousin. Her mother is Dad's sister and her father is Mum's brother, which sounds really kind of very country Australia, doesn't it? Yes, so she's my first cousin. She writes rural fiction, and she's written squillions of books and is phenomenally successful. And she started much earlier, and she writes 2 a year. She just churns them out, quite extraordinary. And I always say to her, you were lucky you didn't study law, because that completely changes the space in your head. And it's taken me so long to let go of the analytical side to go back into the creative side, and she's not had to wrestle with that issue. But one of my favourite Australian authors, gosh, I do love Kim Mahood, who grew up here in Alice, and she wrote Craft for a Dry Lake and Position Doubtful, and they are magnificent stories about the outback and the Aboriginal people. So if you have a particular interest in that kind of story, she is great. And as a child, we had there were the Billabong books when I got a bit older, which I just loved, and of course the Silver Brumby books by Evelyn Mitchell, which was so wonderful. And I think there's about 15 Silver Brumby books. There was just so many and fabulous. And of course Colin Tearley, who wrote all those stories that eventually I got to read. And I think my favourite was February Dragon, because we related to bushfires. But Sun on the Stubble and Fire in the Stone, yeah, they were. There are so many brilliant Australian writers, so past and present.
Yeah, for sure. So your favourite genres are biography and thrillers, aren't they?
Yeah, yes. I'm very predictable.
So do you think you'll ever write a thriller yourself?
Oh, look, I'd love to. And I look at Fleur in awe, and we catch up and I say, how do you do it? And she says, I don't know, it just flows out. And she literally doesn't know. So I haven't yet got to that place where I think I can work out the plotting, because you've got to be really good with your plotting. But maybe one day, if I read enough and and try enough. I haven't tried to write a thriller, so maybe one day that will happen.
Oh, that'd be wonderful. So are there any more questions from the audience? Doesn't look like it. Because we've done 40 minutes, so we'll probably be cutting.
Perfect timing. Perfect.
I'll just do one more question. Was there any question I didn't ask that you wished I asked you?
No, these were such interesting questions. I've had a wonderful time, and I feel like I've been sitting there with you all and sipping my cup of tea and having a lovely time. No, I think you've covered absolutely everything, and I really love the chance to also to talk a bit more about School of the Air, because it's sort of had this revival now because of COVID, and I'm so happy to be so I'm just so happy to see it come out. And excitingly, a journalist in the UK has just done a big article on Bush Kids and School of the Air that was published in the Daily Telegraph today, and I'm thinking about doing a TV series, so that would be a bit exciting, and interviewing people who were involved years ago. So I think that's just one of the things I've loved to talk about and sort of spread the word. But most of all, I just love the chance to talk to you about my books, and thank you so much for your interest.
And we have, thank you, Tanya and Ita, for today's session. I loved your first book, Tanya. I'm heading out this afternoon to buy an Alice Girl. Yay!
That was fantastic. Made my day. Thank you so much.
Oh, and there's another one from Lynn. Thank you, Tanya. I am watching from Gloucester and missed your talk from Mid Coast Council Library during the week, and my friends who did listen loved it.
Oh, that's wonderful feedback. Thank you, Lynn. Yeah, we had a blast. That was a great session. I've now done four library Zoom sessions all over Australia, and they've all been different, and I've loved them all. It's fabulous. So thank you so much, Lynn. Please thank your friends as well. That's wonderful to know.
It's been so fun to have you, because like I said, when you read your books, you think you're my friend.
Oh, that's a wonderful compliment.
Yeah, because, you write with such love about everybody. And I really liked that you from the start want to write stories, and then when you get that nice orange typewriter from your bed. Yes. I just thought that was so wonderful.
Yeah, that was the best present I've ever had in my whole life, either before or since, was a little orange typewriter when I was 10, because that was my first independent way to transport myself and my imagination away into words. And I in fact, oh my goodness, I've got, actually funny you should mention that, I have by the side of my book, this is called Adventures at Cutters Creek, which was one of the books there's a drawing of me on a horse that I drew, and if I open it, you might be able to see some of my typing. It was a pretty, it's not a story for anyone else to ever see, but that was my 10-year-old effort.
Oh, that's fantastic. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I really, really would like to invite you when everything opens up again and you can come in real life, so maybe for your third book.
Yes, I'd love to. Thank you, Ita.
And maybe you should come during Country Music Festival, bring your guitar, because I really want to hear you sing what you sing in Prague to everybody all the time.
Oh, Waltzing Matilda.
Yes.
I'm only a 3-chord wonder guitarist. I am no guitarist, but I do love to sing. So that'd be a hoot. Thank you so much.
Stayed in the library. So I might just unmute everybody if I can, or try. And then we can just all say thank you and goodbye to, not everybody I could unmute, but I tried. So thank you very much, Tanya, and we'll hope to see you in the future. Bye.
Thank you, Tanya.
Bye, Tanya.
Thanks, Eliza, very much. It was lovely. Lovely to meet you, Tanya.
Thank you so much to everyone for coming on. Have a wonderful weekend.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
For more CNRL Author Talks and other podcasts, visit our website at cnl.nsw.gov.au or follow your CNRL branch Facebook page. You can also watch many of our Author Talks. Just search YouTube for CNRL interviews. This podcast was recorded at Tamworth City Library with music by Chad Crouch, aka Poddington Bear, from the freemusicarchive.org. I'm Jonathan from the CNRL Library Innovation Studio. See you next time for more CNRL Author Talks.